A man opens his banking app. The salary's in, rent's covered, the card is paid off. There's enough left for dinner out, maybe a weekend somewhere, maybe that thing he's been putting off buying. For a few seconds it feels good. Then he closes the app, and nothing has actually changed. The money came in, the money will go back out. Next month starts the same way it always does. Underneath the relief, there's a question most people never let themselves finish asking. How much of my life actually belongs to me? Because income and freedom aren't the same thing. You can earn more every single year and still have less room to say no, less time, more obligations, more things you have to protect, defend, and keep from falling apart. And someone else can earn less than you and have something you don't. Options. That gap is what this video is about. Not how rich someone looks. Not the number on the pay stub. What sits underneath it. How much of that person's life is still theirs to direct, and how much of it belongs to something they don't control. 500 years ago, a Florentine political thinker spent most of his career circling a version of this same problem. Not personal finance. He wasn't writing about paychecks. He was writing about states, rulers, armies, and the mechanics of power. But one question runs through almost everything he wrote. Who depends on whom? Who's holding the resources, and who's borrowing them? Who has somewhere else to go when things turn, and who's stuck standing exactly where they are? Niccolo Machiavelli never once mentioned a 401k, but the logic he used to study kingdoms translates, almost uncomfortably well, into an ordinary life. Because power, in his writing, tends to belong to whoever has alternatives, while everyone around them has only one option. That gives us 5 levels. Not 5 income brackets. 5 different relationships with money, dependence, and control. And here's the part that's a little unsettling. You can move up financially and stay exactly where you are on this ladder. You can get a raise and still be trapped. You can look successful to everyone around you and be one bad month from collapse. You can even get rich, properly rich, and discover you've just built a more expensive version of the same cage. So don't spend this video asking which level sounds the most impressive. Ask which one actually describes your life. We'll start where almost everyone starts, at the bottom, with dependence. If this is the kind of thing you find interesting, money looked at through psychology and power instead of spreadsheets. The subscribe button's right there. Cost nothing, and there's a lot more of this coming. Picture a guy named Daniel, 32, decent job. Nothing about his life looks like a disaster from the outside. But look at his checking account, and you'll see something different. He gets paid Friday. By the following week, every dollar already has a job. Rent, car payment, insurance, the credit card, groceries, phone bill, a couple of subscriptions he forgot he was even paying for. 1 or 2 obligations from years ago he can barely explain anymore. There's almost no slack in any of it. So Daniel isn't really being paid for the month ahead. He's being paid to stop last month from catching up with him. That's a small distinction, but it matters more than it sounds. Because at this level, money isn't a tool, it's an emergency response system. Every surprise turns into a threat. A car repair, a medical bill, fewer hours at work, a client who disappears, a family emergency, a boss who finally becomes unbearable. The smaller your margin, the more power any one of those events has over your life. This is where Machiavelli is genuinely useful, and not just as a name dropped in for effect. He came back again and again to a specific worry. A ruler who leans on resources he doesn't control is weaker than he looks. In The Prince, he was particularly wary of leaders who relied on mercenary or borrowed armies, forces that weren't loyal to the state itself, only to whoever was paying them that week. His point wasn't about soldiers specifically. It was that if your survival depends on something outside your control, you don't actually control your survival. Nobody's hiring mercenaries in 2026, but most people are running the modern version of the same risk. Monthly cash flow, with nothing behind it. If losing one paycheck means you can't cover your life, your job isn't just where you work anymore. It's the load-bearing wall holding the whole structure up. That doesn't make employment weak or your employer the villain. It just means dependence has a cost. And it changes behavior in ways people rarely notice while it's happening. Someone with no margin negotiates differently than someone with a year of expenses saved. They tolerate a worse boss. They accept a worse offer. Their threshold for saying this isn't worth it moves, without them ever deciding to move it. Here's the trap almost everyone falls into trying to fix this. They try to solve dependence by spending more, not less. The raise comes in and the apartment gets nicer. The bonus lands and the car gets upgraded. The higher paying job arrives and somehow the monthly obligations climb right alongside it. The number on the pay stub goes up. The dependence stays exactly where it was. At level 1, the actual goal isn't to look richer. It's to become harder to knock over. A small emergency fund does more for you than a large purchase. A useful skill does more than an expensive object. Cutting one fixed cost can buy you more real freedom than adding one more thing that signals status to people who barely notice anyway. This isn't a pitch for deprivation, it's a pitch for margin. Because the first form of wealth was never luxury, it was breathing room. And breathing room does something to how you think that's easy to underestimate. When every decision feels urgent, strategy disappears. You stop asking, what's the best move here? And start asking, how do I get through this month? Those are not the same question, and they don't produce the same life. Once there's enough space that you're no longer making every choice under pressure, something shifts. From the outside, nothing looks different, but something in your head has changed. You're not just reacting to whatever comes at you anymore. You can start watching the board instead of just playing defense on it. That's where level 2 begins. This one is more deceptive than it looks. Daniel gets the raise, pays down some debt. The emergency fund grows. He stops checking his account before every grocery run. Something in him relaxes. And in one sense, it should. His life genuinely is more stable than it was. But then the rewards of that stability start costing something. A better neighborhood, a bigger apartment, more travel, a nicer car, better everything across the board. None of those choices are wrong by themselves. The problem shows up when every increase in income turns into a permanent increase in obligation. Comfort has a strange property once you've had it. You start defending it. At level 1, you're afraid of instability. At level 2, you're afraid of losing the lifestyle you built to escape instability. That's a different cage, but it's still a cage. Someone at this stage isn't desperate, but they can still be dependent. The salary lands, the lifestyle needs it, and the freedom that was supposed to arrive with the bigger income never actually shows up. This is where lifestyle inflation stops being a spreadsheet problem and becomes an identity problem. The apartment isn't just an apartment, it's proof you moved up. The car isn't transportation, it's proof you made it. The vacation isn't a vacation, it's a chapter in the story you've started telling about yourself. Once money gets welded to identity, cutting back starts to feel like failure, even in the moments it would actually make you stronger. People defend a lifestyle that's quietly wearing them down, not because they're protecting the money, but because they're protecting what the money is supposed to mean about them. And that's a much harder thing to let go of. Machiavelli had a political version of this same problem. A ruler doesn't just need resources. He needs to understand what people believe those resources represent. Reputation matters. Appearance matters. And whoever controls what other people believe they can't live without has real leverage over their choices. Modern life runs on exactly this. People say they want financial freedom. What a lot of them actually want is a lifestyle that looks expensive and requires a steady stream of income to keep looking that way. Those are two different goals. And only one of them is real freedom. Real freedom most of the time isn't very photogenic. A paid-off car, a modest place, cash sitting untouched, skills nobody can take from you. Investments you're not constantly fiddling with. A business that doesn't eat every waking hour. The person living that way might look less successful than the one with all the visible markers. But when something actually goes wrong, and eventually something always does, the difference stops being theoretical. One person has a lifestyle, the other has room. That's the moment it becomes obvious that financial strength isn't just about what you can buy. It's about what you're able to refuse. And that's the first real fork in the road. At level 1, money buys survival. At level 2, it buys comfort. Neither one by itself buys freedom. Because freedom starts the moment your choices stop being dictated by whatever your bank balance says today. That takes something stronger than comfort. It takes leverage. This is where the game actually starts to change shape. Leverage gets misunderstood constantly. People hear the word and think debt, big risky bets, some complicated financial maneuver. It's simpler than that. Leverage just means one unit of effort produces more than a unit of result. A skilled professional learns something once and gets paid for it for the next 15 years. A business owner builds a system that keeps functioning without them personally touching every step. An investor puts capital into something that can grow on its own, without demanding another 40-hour week to justify itself. A creator makes one thing and lets thousands of people consume it, over and over, without doing the work again each time. Different mechanisms. Same underlying shift. Your future stops depending entirely on repeating your past effort. That distinction is bigger than it sounds. At level 2, if Daniel wants more money, the obvious move is to work more hours, more clients, another promotion, another side hustle. Every solution runs through adding effort. At level 3, the question changes shape. Instead of, how do I work harder, it becomes, what can I build that keeps producing value after I've stopped working on it? That's a genuine dividing line, because time doesn't scale. Leverage does. Machiavelli gives us a useful frame here too, carefully, without pretending he was secretly writing an investing manual 500 years early. He was deeply concerned with whether a ruler's position rested on his own capability or on borrowed strength. A prince who depended entirely on someone else's army, someone else's money, someone else's goodwill, was, in his view, never really secure, no matter how strong he looked in the moment. Translate that forward. The more of your future runs through resources you actually control, the more room you have to act. That resource might be capital, a rare skill, a company, intellectual property, a reputation earned over years of reliable work, a network that trusts you because you've made a habit of creating value for it. The specific form changes from person to person. The underlying principle doesn't. Control creates options. Options create bargaining power. And bargaining power quietly rewires how you behave. Say Daniel gets an offer paying 20% more. At level 2, he probably takes it. He needs it. At level 3, the answer isn't automatic anymore. He can actually look at the manager, the hours, the upside, the risk. He can turn it down. That decision might look unremarkable from the outside, but it's one of the clearest signals that someone has moved up a level. They've stopped asking only, what can I get? And started asking, what does this do to my position? That's a genuinely different way of thinking. Level 3 has its own trap though. Leverage opens the door to freedom, but it can also open the door to complexity. The business grows, the investments grow, the obligations grow, the network grows. And at some point, the person who thought they were escaping work has quietly built a bigger machine that now depends on them. This happens constantly. Somebody leaves a job to start a business, and 3 years later, they own a business that owns them right back. More control on paper, less actual free time in practice. That's not leverage. That's just a different kind of labor wearing leverage's clothes. Real leverage eventually does something more important than generate income. It gives you back time. And time is where freedom stops being theoretical. Once your systems, your assets, your skills, and your relationships start reducing how much of your own effort is required to hold your position, you've stepped into something bigger than leverage. You've started building independence from any single source. It's a strange word to apply to an ordinary person's finances. Sounds political. But at its core, it means something simple. Your life is increasingly shaped by decisions you make, rather than conditions you're forced to accept. At this level, the central asset isn't money. It's optionality. You can change jobs without panicking, take a year to build something, move cities, Turn down a client. Walk away from a bad partnership. Say no to a purchase that would impress people you don't actually care about. Wait. And the ability to wait is a lot more powerful than it sounds, because urgency makes people cheap. Desperately need the deal, you negotiate worse. Desperately need approval, you'll tolerate things you shouldn't. Desperately need the paycheck, you'll accept terms you'd never accept otherwise. Sovereignty means shrinking the number of moments where desperation gets to make the call instead of you. That doesn't mean going off-grid. Becoming totally self-sufficient. Owing nothing to anyone. Nobody actually lives outside every system. The goal isn't total isolation, it's cutting the unnecessary dependencies. There's a real difference between participating in a system and being trapped inside one. This is also where a deeper piece of Machiavelli's thinking earns its place. He argued that fortune, the unpredictable, uncontrollable side of life, would always be in play, no matter how skilled or careful you were. You can't eliminate uncertainty. You can't guarantee your plans will hold up. But you can improve your ability to respond when the ground shifts under you. That's what preparation is actually for. Someone with no reserves is at fortune's mercy. Someone with reserves, skills, relationships, and alternatives will still get unlucky sometimes. But bad luck no longer dictates the next move as completely. That's a real form of power, and it changes the entire psychology of risk. At level 1, risk is everywhere, all the time. At level 2, it's hiding behind comfort. At level 3, it becomes something you can actually manage. At level 4, it becomes something you get to choose. That's the real distinction. A sovereign person doesn't necessarily take bigger risks. They have more say over which risks are even worth taking. And here's a mistake a lot of people make once they start thinking about this. They assume freedom means doing nothing, sleeping in, traveling non-stop, walking away from every responsibility. That's not it. Freedom is the ability to decide what your effort is actually for. Someone can work 60 hours a week and feel completely free because they chose the work, understand the trade, and could leave any time they wanted. Someone else can work 30 hours and feel trapped because every one of those hours is dictated by somebody else's demands. The hour count isn't the story, agency is, which means the ladder stops being purely about money at this point. You can have plenty of it and still lack sovereignty. You can have very little of it and be moving straight toward it. Because the real shift is happening in your relationship with dependence, not in your account balance. You're no longer asking, how do I make enough to survive? You're asking, what arrangements let me actually choose? And that question leads somewhere harder. What happens once you have enough control that money itself stops being the main obstacle? What do you do once survival's handled, comfort's available, leverage is working, and your life finally has room in it? That's where the next level starts, and it changes what wealth even means. This is the level people get wrong most often, because it's tempting to describe it as simply being very rich. That's too small a definition. Someone can have enormous wealth and still be living, psychologically, at level 2, spending everything defending an image, ruled by status, needing constant validation, a prisoner inside the very empire they built. Level 5 is a different thing entirely. It's the point where wealth stops being mainly about consumption and starts being about continuity. The question changes to, what keeps going without me? A company, a family structure that outlives one generation's decisions, an investment portfolio, a foundation, an institution, a body of work, a reputation built deep enough that it opens doors for people who've never even met you. The specific form matters less than the underlying shift, from accumulating resources to building something that outlasts your direct involvement in it. Legacy is the word people usually reach for, but there's another word that matters just as much: stewardship. Because once resources get large enough, the challenge isn't acquiring more of them anymore. It's deciding what they're actually for. Machiavelli was intensely preoccupied with permanence, not just whether a ruler could seize power, but whether he could hold it, whether the institutions he built would last, whether dependence would quietly undermine everything he'd fought for, whether reputation would prop his authority or slowly erode it. That's not a secret blueprint for personal wealth. He wasn't writing about it. But his questions point somewhere genuinely useful for us. What remains when the person who built the system is no longer standing in the room? That's a much bigger question than, how much money do I have? Take two wealthy people. The first owns 10 businesses, and every decision still funnels through him personally. Every problem lands back on his desk. Every relationship exists because of him specifically. If he disappeared for 6 months, the whole thing would start to wobble. He's wealthy, but nothing about the system is durable. The second person owns less, but the companies have real operators who don't need her in the room. The investments are structured to run without daily attention. The next generation actually understands the principles behind the money, not just the number itself. The systems are documented, not locked inside one person's head. The institution can make decisions without a constant intervention. Less personal visibility, more actual continuity. That's a different kind of power, quieter, and in some ways stronger, and eventually, at the highest level, visibility itself starts to matter less. While you're still building, recognition is useful. It opens doors, builds credibility, pulls in opportunity, but once attention becomes easy to get, it starts costing more than it's worth. There's a point where the real question stops being, how do I get noticed? And becomes, what can keep working without anyone needing to notice me at all? That's a much quieter form of power, and it brings us right back to where we started. Remember Daniel, at level 1, he needed every single paycheck. At level 2, he needed the lifestyle the paychecks were funding. At level 3, he started converting effort into assets, skills, and systems. At level 4, he became hard to corner because he finally had somewhere else to go. At level 5, the objective itself changed. He stopped asking how to secure his own life and started asking what could keep going after he was no longer part of it. Notice what actually happened along the way. He didn't just get richer, he got less dependent. That's the real ladder. Money was only ever one part of it. The gap between the levels. Here's the part that matters most about all 5 of these. You don't climb because your bank balance goes up. You climb because your relationship with dependence changes. That's the whole mechanism. And it's why someone earning 6 figures can still feel completely trapped, while someone with a modest income can sometimes have far more control over their actual life. The number alone won't tell you the level. The structure underneath it will. At level 1, a missed paycheck creates a crisis. At level 2, losing the paycheck means losing the lifestyle built on top of it. At level 3, losing it still hurts, but other things start carrying some of the weight. At level 4, no single source controls your entire future. At level 5, what you've built keeps producing value whether you show up or not. That's a progression in control, and every step of it comes with a psychological cost. Moving from 1 to 2 takes restraint. You have to stop spending every raise the moment it lands, and build margin while everyone around you is upgrading their life. Moving from 2 to 3 takes patience, tolerating the stretch where money gets redirected into assets and systems instead of things you can show people. Moving from 3 to 4 takes tolerance for uncertainty, making decisions with no guarantee attached, and risk instead of pretending you can eliminate it. And moving from 4 to 5 takes something else entirely. You have to stop thinking only about yourself. At a certain size, wealth stops being able to stay purely personal. What are the systems? Who benefits? What survives? What values actually get carried forward? That's why the last level isn't just more. It's a different thing altogether. And here's the part that's easy to miss. The level you're on right now was probably built by decisions that made complete sense at the level below it. Spending that looks irresponsible to one person looked like proof of progress to someone else at an earlier stage. Risk that looks reckless from the outside might be the exact calculated move, creating leverage for the person taking it. Discipline that looks excessive from a distance might just be what's required to protect a much bigger strategy, which is why comparing your life to someone else's is such a bad habit. You're looking at the visible result. You have no idea about the structure holding it up. The Machiavellian Question. The most useful thing Machiavelli offers here isn't a lesson in ruthlessness. It's a lesson in seeing clearly. He wasn't writing a manual on personal virtue. He was studying what happens when power collides with uncertainty. What makes a position secure? What makes it fragile? What happens when a leader depends on forces outside his control? What happens when appearance starts mattering more than the actual strength underneath it? What happens when fortune turns, the way it eventually always does? Those questions translate into money more directly than you'd expect. So look at your own life for a second. What do you actually depend on? One employer, one client, one skill, one platform, one property, one source of capital, one person's approval. A lifestyle that only works if everything keeps going exactly the way it's going right now. Because anything that's absolutely necessary to your life can quietly become something with control over you. That doesn't mean eliminating every dependency. That's not possible, and nobody manages it. The goal is to make your dependencies visible. Someone who knows exactly what they're relying on can start reducing the most dangerous ones. Someone who refuses to look stays exposed without ever knowing it. Which is why the first real move toward financial power usually isn't earning more. It's seeing more clearly. Look at where your money actually goes. Which obligations can't be reduced? Which skills does your income depend on? What happens if that income disappeared tomorrow? What assets keep working whether you show up or not? Which relationships expand your options, and which ones quietly narrow them? What part of your lifestyle is genuinely useful to you, and what part exists mainly so nobody thinks you've slipped backward? Those questions are uncomfortable because they go straight at identity, but that's usually exactly where the real problem is living. People don't just spend money. They spend it protecting a version of themselves. They don't just stay in jobs. They stay because leaving would mean admitting the path they committed to stopped working. They don't just maintain expensive lifestyles. They maintain the story the lifestyle is supposed to be telling. Which is why financial change is so much more emotional than it looks on paper. You're not always giving up an object. Sometimes you're giving up who you thought you were. Which level are you actually on? So forget the salary number for a second. Forget the car, the house, what your friends think, what your profile suggests about you. Ask yourself 5 simpler questions. If your income stopped tomorrow, how long could your current life keep running as is? That's level 1. If your income rose sharply, would your obligations rise right along with it? That's level 2. Do you own anything? A skill, an asset, a system, a business, an investment, a piece of intellectual property, a relationship that can create value without the same amount of effort every single time? That's level 3. Could you make a major decision without one employer, one client, or one financial event deciding the outcome for you? That's level 4. And finally, what have you actually built that would stay useful without you in the room? That's level 5. You might be high on one and low on another. And that's completely normal. Some people have excellent skills and no reserves. Some have real assets and no discipline. Some have money and no autonomy. Some have autonomy and nothing built that will outlast them. The point isn't to hand yourself a flattering label. It's to find the weakest link, because that weakest dependency usually decides your actual freedom more than your strongest asset ever will. A person with $1 million sitting on one fragile source of income isn't as secure as the number makes them look. A person with 3 independent income streams, low fixed costs, real skills, and a year of reserves might have more room to move than their net worth would ever suggest. Again, it was never the number. It's the structure, what actually moves you up. There's no universal formula here, but there is a shared direction. From consumption toward ownership, from urgency toward margin, from labor alone toward leverage, from dependence toward alternatives, from attention toward substance, from short-term validation toward long-term control, and eventually, from accumulation toward stewardship. None of that requires becoming cold, which is another mistake people make the moment they discover Machiavelli. They assume strategic thinking has to mean ruthlessness. It doesn't. His writing is valuable precisely because it makes you look straight at incentives, consequences, dependence, uncertainty, and reputation, without pretending good intentions automatically produce good outcomes on their own. You can care about people and still understand incentives. You can be generous and still hold boundaries. You can work for someone and still be building your own independence in the background. You can be ambitious without turning money into your entire identity. The goal was never to control everyone around you. It's to stop building a life that one fragile point can control instead. Because someone who actually understands power doesn't need to keep performing it. They just need room to move. Go back to that man opening his banking app. The salary's still there. The bills still exist. Next month is still coming, the same as it always does. But the question underneath it sounds different now. It's not how much money do I make. It's how much of my future depends on things I don't control. That question quietly reshapes how you see almost everything after it. A raise becomes a chance to build margin instead of just a reason to spend more. An investment becomes a way to shrink dependence instead of just chasing a return. A skill becomes bargaining power. A business becomes valuable not because it keeps you busy, but because it can eventually run without needing you in every hour of it. Savings turn into time. Ownership turns into options. Options turn into leverage. And leverage turns into freedom, not poor to rich, dependent to difficult to control. That's why the 5 levels matter. Because your fate was never decided only by how much money hits your account. It's decided by what happens after it lands. Does it vanish into obligations? Does it turn into lifestyle? Does it become an asset? Does it become leverage? Does it become something durable enough to outlast you? 5 very different destinations. And most people spend decades moving up the first ladder, income, while barely moving at all on the one that actually matters. That's the quiet tragedy in most of this. People get more expensive to maintain instead of harder to control. Earn more, owe more. Own more, worry more. Get more visible, get less free. The outside world calls it success. Their calendar tells a different story. So maybe the better question was never, how do I get richer? Maybe it's this. How do I make fewer things capable of deciding my life for me? That question changes what you're actually chasing. You stop pursuing income for its own sake. You start building margin. Then assets, then leverage, then alternatives. Then something durable enough to keep standing without you. And somewhere in that process, money stops being the thing you're trying to collect. It becomes the thing you're using to buy back pieces of your own decisions. That's what freedom looks like up close. Quiet. Often unimpressive, sometimes even a little boring, but available. These 5 levels aren't a staircase everyone has to climb the same way. They're a way of seeing, a way of noticing whether your money is making you stronger or just making the cage more comfortable to sit in. And once you can see that difference, it's very hard to unsee it. So look at your own life again, not the version you show people, not the number that impresses them, the structure underneath it. What happens if your income disappears? What happens if your biggest client walks? What happens if the market turns against you? What happens if you had to say no to everything for 6 months straight? And maybe the one that matters most. What have you actually built that gives you choices once circumstances stop cooperating? That answer tells you more about your real level than your paycheck ever will. Because wealth was never really about how much life hands you. It's about how much of your life is still yours once life stops giving you what you expected. Once you understand that, the question changes for good. You stop asking how to look powerful. You start asking how to become harder to move. That's where real freedom actually begins. If this changed the way you're thinking about your own numbers, the subscribe button helps more than you'd think. And there's a lot more of this coming. Machiavellian Capital will keep looking at the systems underneath the surface. quietly, honestly, and without pretending the world works any differently than it actually does.